Welcome to the Freebirth podcast, a supportive space for people who are learning, exploring, and celebrating their autonomous choices in childbirth. Together, we'll unpack truths, share personal stories, and claim our ability to birth freely and intuitively. Here's your host, Emily Saldea.
Today we are joined by Rose from the south coast of New South Wales, Australia. After a fairly challenging and dramatic first home birth, Rose was dead set on not having another child for some time. On a trip back to Australia from the Caribbean where her partner was working, she discovered she was pregnant yet again. On the brink of Hurricane Irma, she was separated from her partner for many months, who got stuck in the Caribbean in the aftermath of the disastrous hurricane. Rose stayed in Australia with family and decided to free birth. She experienced a simple and painless ecstatic birth with her daughter. She also talks about what it was like to have her toddler son at the birth, her regret of ultrasounds, and the lessons she learned from both of her births.
Probably starts with when I met my partner. Before that, I was living in Jamaica. I was working and living on a farm in Jamaica. And then I ended up kind of finding myself on this island. I was hitchhiking around the Caribbean. I'd been hitchhiking around the world for about 8 years.
Whoa.
And yeah. And I found myself on this little island, and I didn't intend to stay there for very long, but I met this man at the supermarket that ended up being my partner, and stayed on that little island. So ended up kind of moving myself into his house, and then 8 weeks later we found out we were pregnant.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So it was definitely really scary, at the beginning. I didn't know this man at all. I had literally just met him. We'd known each other, for 8 weeks. I hadn't planned on being pregnant. I'd never been pregnant before. That wasn't something on my radar at all.
Wow.
It was really scary. When I listened to the women's stories about conscious conception, and it all sounds so beautiful, but for me, it was really scary.
Mm-hmm.
So, we kind of talked about what we would do and, whether this is something that we're willing to jump in and do together. And at that time, he was working 2 full-time jobs, so we didn't see each other very often. And anyway, we ended up deciding that this is something that we were willing to do together. And I had always, I was born at home. So that's probably an important thing to note. I was born at home. My brother was born at home. So I knew that whenever I was to have children, it would always be at home. That wasn't a question. And actually my mother, 30 years ago, when she gave birth to my brother and I, she was part of the home birth movement here in Australia. So she set up conferences with Jane Hardwick Collins, and she was very involved in what was happening here 30 years ago. And when I fell pregnant with my son, she said to me, she came, it was very sad for her, because she had hoped 30 years ago that when she and her friends were doing all this great work, she hoped that birthing at home was going to be something super normal and
Aww.
very common when her daughter felt pregnant. So for her, she felt that she saw that the fight still had to be fought, and that for her was a bit sad.
Totally.
But there I was, on this island in the middle of nowhere. So the island's called Providenciales. It's in the islands of Turks and Caicos, but it's a very small little place. They have a tiny little hospital. Nobody has home births. The cesarean rate's really high. And I knew that wasn't a place to birth.
Mm-hmm.
Also, that particular island doesn't have any fresh drinkable water.
Whoa.
On the island. So everything, all the fruit and vegetables are imported. And the fact that there's no fresh water on the island, it, like, from the moment that I stepped foot on that island, I felt very uncomfortable. And the vibration on the island is very low. The energy is very low. And like even if I was to free birth, I knew that wasn't, I didn't feel comfortable birthing on that island. It didn't feel like a place of life. So I knew that I would have to leave. And I also didn't have a visa to be on that island. I didn't have legal status, so I had to leave every 90 days. So I would fly to Canada, and I flew to Jamaica, and I flew to Puerto Rico, and did this all while I was pregnant. So I was still hitchhiking and selling my jewelry, like, on the way, and I sort of didn't stop that kind of lifestyle. And then when I was 7 months pregnant, I flew back to Australia. He stayed on the island in Turks and Caicos. We just call it Provo, so I'll just refer to it as Provo.
Okay.
Because it's called Providenciales, so it's like a shortening. And yeah, so he was in Provo, but he did come for the birth. He'd come to Australia for the birth. He's from Haiti. Oh, and I forgot to mention that I did get one ultrasound during that pregnancy. So when I was I would say about 15 weeks pregnant, I went to a gynecologist, a private gynecologist on the island. She was from Germany, and I had never been like to a doctor really before. I've been a healthy person my whole life, and I really have very limited experience with doctors and hospitals. But I didn't know what to do. I thought that's what people did. So I went to see her, and she, confirmed that I was pregnant, and I peed in a cup and all the regular stuff. And she did this tiny little ultrasound, and it took about 5 minutes, and she just sort of said, yeah, the baby's healthy, and then turned off the machine. And it was very just easygoing. And she told me that she birthed her babies at home, and I said, yeah, I'm going to give birth at home. And it was a positive interaction, and it was short. But it was $600 for that appointment.
So you otherwise you just didn't see anybody. You just kind of did your own thing.
Yeah. So then I just did my own thing for the rest of the pregnancy. And then, so I flew to Australia. I was 7 months pregnant, and at that point, I still didn't know whether I would free birth or whether I would find a midwife. So I flew, but I didn't know anyone in Australia. I hadn't lived in Australia for a very long time. So when I flew here, I stayed at my dad's property, and I started to search around this local area for a home birth midwife, and found that actually they're few and far between, and they're really hard to get a hold of, and they're really expensive. And I started to think, I think I'm just going to have this baby unassisted. I hadn't heard of the term free birth at that point, but I had lived in Jamaica, where women just go to the river and give birth to their baby. I had lived in Cameroon, in West Africa, where it's a similar deal, and I had seen that happen, so I knew that was normal. But I was in a place where I would have liked to have had a midwife if they were accessible, because I didn't see having a midwife attending my birth as a negative thing at that point.
Right, because ideally they're an absolute wonderful thing.
Yeah, ideally, yeah. Unless they're there to mess up your birth.
Right.
Yeah. So anyway, I wasn't finding one, and I think I was 35 weeks pregnant, and my mum and I took a road trip down south, and I just ended up popping into a little shop. It was like just in a little kind of village in the mountains, and I was in this like hippie shop with crystals, and all these women were, walking around wearing harem pants. And I'm like, there's no way these women go to the hospital about their baby. Like, it's crazy. And so I just asked around, and one of the ladies said, oh yeah, like the lady just in the next shop, she just gave birth a couple of weeks ago, and like she should know. And then so I went and spoke to her, and she got me in contact with a woman who was a local midwife, and she was a registered midwife, and she gave me her phone number, and we ended up having tea that afternoon in a little cafe. She came to meet me there. And as soon as I met her, I was like, she's just like, I fell in love with her. She was barefoot, and she was wearing this really lovely flowing green dress, and she had her hair out, and she had all this armpit hair. And I was like, yes, I want you at my birth. And she agreed to come to my birth, and she said, that sounds fantastic. But she told me that she actually had holidays planned for that time. So of when I was due. So she told me that she would attend my birth, but that that she might not be there, basically. So if I was to go early, then I would just have the baby at home, and then she wouldn't end up charging me. And then if I gave birth after she got back from her holiday, then of course she would come, and then I would pay her the fee, if that makes sense. She ended up being available. I had my son on the 26th of January. So it was on a Monday that I went into labor. I had no pre-labor or prodromal labor with my son, and he was posterior. So I went into labor at about 8:30 p.m. on the Monday evening, and because I had never felt what a contraction feels like before, and I had no sort of like easy pre-labor, I was actually pouring myself a cup of tea when I felt the first contraction, and it shocked me so much that I spilt the boiling hot water all over my belly. Yeah, and I had a scar for about 6 months.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so it was really violent, and it just came out of nowhere. And, I still don't know whether or not like the hot water might have like joggled him into a weird place or scared him in my belly. But it was a very kind of like sort of violent the beginning of the labor. And then I had contractions that were very, very close together from the very beginning. So the contractions were about sort of 1 or 2 minutes apart, lasting about 30 seconds from the get-go. And so that was about 8:30. I think I phoned the midwife. Oh, the other thing to mention is that my midwife lived 4 hours away from me. This is just a reality in rural Australia. Yeah. So, so I was aware that like, I had read all of like Ina May and like all these birth stories, and I didn't want to be that person that calls the midwife out super early. I don't know why. I just had that thing in my head. And so I was like, no, I'm not going to call her. It's way too early, of course. But I did phone her to tell her that I had started to be in labor, and she told me on the phone, you should go down, just go and rest and lie down and relax. And at that point, I'd only been in labor for about half an hour, but I was like, that is not a possibility. I was like, I was already,
it was on
from the very beginning. Yeah, I was already having to lean on the wall, breathing really deeply, needing pressure in my back. Like it was on. And she said, yeah, just go lie down and rest. I'm like, no, lady, like this is like, we're not at that point.
Yeah.
So then my husband and I went into my bedroom to kind of labor together, and he was putting pressure on my back. and I didn't know, but my dad, so we had the baby, we gave birth at my dad's property, and my dad didn't tell me, but at about 10:30 in the evening, he had phoned the midwife back and told her to get in the car and come. So she ended up arriving about 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. And my mum had 2 very easy, simple births at home. So for my dad to see me kind of like in that amount of pain and really struggling, he kind of freaked out a little bit and was like, oh, I really think the midwife should be here. Because I think he thought that I was in transition or, about to have the baby. So anyway, we just kind of worked through the contractions. It was about 5 a.m. And I should mention, at this point, I definitely knew that the baby was posterior. It was a very distinct sensation between, having his back rubbing against my spine and my lower back. That was a very clear pain. And then when the contractions would come on, the sensation of my uterus contracting and pushing my baby down was it was very easy to distinguish between those two sensations. And the pain in my back didn't subside for the entire 17 hours of labor, whereas the contractions of my uterus, they would obviously come on, the sensation would come on, and then the contraction would subside, and then I would get a rest from that particular sensation. And there was a knowledge that the sensation of my uterus contracting was a healthy sensation. It felt like a good sensation, something that was healthy and positive, and the pain in my back didn't feel that way. It didn't feel like it was normal or healthy. And I knew that he was definitely posterior, and I said that a few hours in, and my midwife kind of just nodded and said she didn't really want to, I don't think she wanted me to think that was going to make the labor worse or longer. Anyway.
There's so much energy around posterior, and I definitely have seen it be, really hard, but I've also seen it not be, so
exactly.
I don't want anyone to get too freaked out.
Exactly. Yeah. Like I hear women, I think Laura Shanley had a pretty straightforward posterior birth, and women totally do. So, but anyway, and then, about 5 a.m., I asked, so my midwife she's a very calm and relaxed, quiet person. She was just kind of sitting in the corner and chilled out, and she's a very hands-off person. And the interventions that I had during that birth were 100% my, decisions. So
what do you mean? What interventions did you decide to have?
Well, I had cervical exams. She checked me twice, and I ended up having her break my waters at about 11 a.m. So, and I regret that decision 100%.
Yeah.
But, and I regret the cervical exams as well.
Yeah.
I mean, they were useless. I mean, when she checked me about 5 a.m. and told me that I was about 5 or 6 centimeters, it was such bad news. In my head, it was.
I know it does so much more harm than good psychologically, because if you want a vaginal exam, you're probably not close to delivery. Exactly. And so if you don't want one because you're what's the word, bearing down and you're growling, well then no shit, you don't want one because you're about to have a baby. But I mean, although I guess I wanted one and wound up, I was complete, but I regret mine as well. It doesn't, it's this, it's an illusion of control and this illusion that we're going to somehow be able to gauge out what's exactly happening. And obviously we both know that's not true, and it's so heady, and I feel ya.
that was just like the stupidest thing. Like I remember just feeling like that was just the stupidest decision to do that, to know that. And then that really like, yeah, just like, I don't know, just was, then it was just a mind fuck from then on, because I was constantly trying to tell myself that like, no, I'm not halfway, I'm probably more than halfway, and then these centimeters are going to go faster, and then I was just thinking too much, and then it made it much more difficult to just surrender and go with it. So that was definitely a bad idea. And to my midwife's credit, she was always trying to talk me against having, the first time I suggested it, she was like, oh, why don't we wait a few more hours and see. And so I think, she probably knew that truth as well. Anyway, so I ended up getting in the birth pool probably at about 11 a.m. My son ended up being born at 2 p.m., by the way, so that the kind of time frame. But yeah, I think I got in the pool about 11 a.m. But I was still in a lot of pain. He was still really high up. I could feel him kicking in my ribs. My midwife checked me again, and she said I was still like probably 7 centimeters. So I was really, really like, I just felt like I had a really long time to go. And having had an anterior birth recently, the really hard thing about that particular labor, and again, I'm not saying that all posterior births go like this, but the contractions with my son's birth felt incredibly inefficient. Like he honestly, he felt like he was in the exact same position inside me for 17 hours. He honestly felt like he didn't move. Yeah. The contractions were not getting him down at all. He wasn't descending. I didn't feel him descend the entire time. Right. It wasn't until transition that he really descended. So he felt really stuck. And it was really hard. Like just feeling like throughout the whole labor, I didn't get any sense of like, progress. Like, my midwife broke my waters and it didn't really do anything. I was in the pool, and I was exhausted also at this point. I had vomited up everything I had eaten. I couldn't even keep down water. I was incredibly nauseous. I had no food at this point for the whole time. So that was another thing that was a big mistake. I couldn't keep down any food, couldn't keep down any water. I was severely dehydrated. I was exhausted. My partner had to hold my head up in the water so that I wouldn't keep swallowing water when I was in the birth pool. It was brutal. And I remember at one point just thinking that if this is how I die, then that is okay.
Totally.
Like I'm sure a lot of women can relate to that. Like I remember literally being like thinking, I've had a pretty sweet life. Like I'm 26. I was hitchhiked around the world for 10 years. I've done some pretty cool stuff. I've been in prison. Like, I've had a pretty sweet life. I'm done. Like I am cool if this is it.
You're like, just please let it be soon.
I was like, I'm totally done. And actually, Emily, I had this wild experience. This is something I wanted to mention where, and I'm sure a lot of women have gone to this place in labor where I actually left my body. And I remember floating like up in the ceiling of my dad's house where we were in the library and there were these bookshelves around, and I was just sort of floating like up the top where the skylight is. And I remember looking down and just thinking like, wow, like that woman is in labor and she's working so hard, and like just staring and being a witness to the situation. And then all of a sudden being like, holy fuck, that's me in labor. Wow. And then I kind of just came down into my body again. And that was wild. Anyway, so at some point I decided that that my baby was stuck, and I really didn't have any energy left. I was totally drained. I I really felt like I wasn't progressing. I had tried squatting. I had tried moving around. I had tried all sorts of different positions. Like I just didn't have anything left in me. And my support team were not suggesting anything else, or they didn't have anything to offer me. So, and that was my midwife, my husband, my mom, and my dad were all there. And so I said to everybody, I think I need to go to hospital. I think the baby's stuck. And I couldn't think of anything else to do at that point. Like I didn't have any other tools in my toolbox.
Which sucks because that's literally what a midwife is supposed to be there for.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I really feel, and I was really disappointed that the people didn't have the reaction of, no, you can do it.
Right.
And, I was in transition. I later realized I was in transition. I was doubting myself. And I was like, this baby's stuck. I can't do it anymore. I'm exhausted. And nobody had anything to offer me, not even words of encouragement.
Wow.
And so, and everybody there knew how adamant I was about giving birth at home and how, anti-hospital I was. So for me to say something like that was a pretty big fucking deal. And, but no one said anything. And, when I look back to that, I think that's not what they were there for. They should have been able to say something. And surely like my mum or the midwife that had both had children could have told me, hey, you're probably in transition.
Right.
But not even that. So we called an ambulance. And the midwife, where my dad's property is, there's a small hospital, which is 15 minutes away. And then there's a large hospital, which is an hour and 15 minutes drive. But the small hospital 5 or 6 years ago stopped doing births. Because they don't have an obstetrician on call, and that's a whole other story. But they refuse to take women in labor there. They send them to the larger hospital. So, but I was thinking at this point, maybe I just need like a drip or something. Maybe I just need to be like hydrated, or I don't know. I had no idea what I needed.
Right, of course.
But they said to my midwife on the phone that they wouldn't take me to the smaller hospital, but they would have to take me to the larger hospital that was a further drive away. And I could hear her having the conversation on the phone while I was getting out of the pool. And I yelled to her, just forget it then. Like, I'm not spending an hour and 15 minutes in the back of the ambulance. Right. And so I was like, just forget it. I was just like, just forget it. And at this point I was actually on all fours right next to the pool. I had just got out of the pool, and all of a sudden I felt the urge to bear down and start pushing. And I was like, whoa, what's this? And I did have like one like little push there, but it didn't feel like anything was really coming or anything was really happening. And then what happened was the ambulance officers turned up at the house, and they pushed a stretcher to kind of like my dad's house has like a little library and then like some steps down to the main room, and they put the stretcher there, and they said that I had to get myself on the stretcher and that they couldn't lower the stretcher, which I thought was really odd. And it was really high, and everyone was saying, how the hell is she going to get herself onto the stretcher? Like, that's crazy. And I was like, I can't get onto that. Like, I'm a whale, like I'm in transition. Like, there's no way that's happening. Like, I could barely move. I mean, in the previous 3 or 4 hours, no matter what I did or where I went, I had to have 2 people supporting me. I was that exhausted and that drained. And so my dad and my partner were preparing to like literally lift me up onto the stretcher. And then out of nowhere, my husband said that it looked like I was possessed. Out of nowhere, I basically just ran and like jumped onto the stretcher and like put my leg really far. I had to like lift one of my legs really high up to get myself onto the stretcher. And then that's what did it. That's what jiggled my son down. So I felt, it was amazing. So then I was on the stretcher, and in my head I was like, whoa. And then all of a sudden, all the back pain was totally gone. And I just felt him right there. And I mean, it was like this big kerfuffle. Like my mom and dad were running into the garage to get into their car. And then the people were already wheeling me down out the doors and into the back of the ambulance. And there I am, like holding, like I had my hand, on my vagina, thinking, this is my baby coming right now. Like, that's insane how he just like jiggled it down. Like, I was so internal at that point. And then all this stuff was happening. And then all of a sudden I was in the back of the ambulance, and people are closing doors and people are getting in, and I'm saying, no, wait, the baby's coming.
Wow.
I'm saying, no, wait, the baby's coming. And we drove about 100 meters down the road, and I just yelled, the baby's coming, stop the car. And I just pushed, and he came out right there.
Oh my God. Were you in the ambulance when he came out?
I was in the ambulance, yeah.
Wow.
I was in the back of the ambulance. The midwife was with me. My husband was in the front of the ambulance with the driver, and my mom and my dad were driving behind the ambulance. So, we just stopped and, we just turned around and went back to the house.
Wow.
So
wait, they didn't keep trying to push you on to the hospital?
No.
That's interesting. I'm surprised they didn't want to go to get you checked out.
No, they asked me. They said, do you want to keep going or do you want to go home? I said, no, we're going home. Thank you very much. And they ended up coming into the house. They were really nice. Both of the officers were really nice. One female and one male. They were crying, and my mom was making them tea and muffins, and they were just kind of like, they were fine. They were nice. And, and then we just went back to the house, and I birthed the placenta there. But I felt
Did
really,
they all leave?
They left after the birth of the placenta.
Wow.
Yeah. So they asked me if they could stay for the birth of the placenta, because I had said I was going to have a physiological third stage, and they said, can we wait? Because I guess they would have had Syntocin or whatever. But my midwife had Syntocin in our fridge anyway. Mm-hmm. So, but they asked if they could stay, and I said, that's fine. I mean, at that point I was so exhausted and just relieved. I mean, I didn't. So, so that was my son's birth.
Wow.
It was pretty like, dramatic and chaotic. It didn't need to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt stupid. I felt really like stupid about calling the ambulance and having it go down that way. But at the end, when I think back, that really getting on the stretcher was what jiggled him down. And I don't know if I would have had the strength to really make violent movements to get him down, because that's what he needed. It was just a lot of drama. And it's funny because that's totally my son. My son is all about drama and chaos, and he's super noisy. And the other thing that happened, unbeknownst to me, was that while my dad and my mum were filling up the birth pool with hot water, my dad's house ran out of hot water. So he climbed over the fence to the neighbor's house and sort of broke into their house and hooked up a hot water hose from their laundry over the fence and into his house.
God.
Yeah. And then the hot water pipe burst inside their house, and their whole laundry and house was flooded with boiling hot water.
They weren't home?
They weren't home. No, my dad ended up having to give them a bunch of money.
Yeah.
And,
oh my God. Okay. So then take me to your evolution of free birth. I mean, obviously you then free birthed your little girl. So what was it, in the wake of that birth and processing that and unpacking it and then take me into this next pregnancy?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, I definitely felt having my midwife there was not necessarily a positive addition. She's a lovely person, but she didn't really participate in a very big way. in that birth.
And when you needed her to participate at the end, she didn't.
Yeah. And, neither did the other people there. Yeah, I think it was a big realization for me that actually I didn't need any of those people. Like, it wasn't just, okay, next time I give birth, I won't have a midwife. It was, next time I give birth, I won't have anyone, because they were all like fairly useless. I love them all. And it sounds like I'm being ungrateful for their support. But at the end of the day, it wasn't, like, I had to go through that experience to realize that actually birth is not a team effort.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
It is, you are the only person in the entire world that's going to birth your baby. And if you take 100% responsibility for it from the get-go, from conception, then, you're just in such a better mindset too. Mm-hmm. And I didn't do that with my son. I thought, I really took on the whole event as if it was a team sport, and as if having these people there and having this support, we're going to do this together, and we're going to birth this baby together. And that just, so I realized that.
Yeah. I mean, it's like when people say we're pregnant or we're having a free birth or we are, it's like, no, I'm sorry. No. That is factually untrue.
Absolutely. Yeah. And my point of realization of that was when I was in the pool and I knew he was stuck, and I was looking at these 4 adults in the room thinking, these people have nothing to offer me. Like, I am the only person in the whole world that's going to birth this baby. And I was an hour before I birthed him. Mm-hmm. I wish I had realized that months and months before. And so when my son was 4 weeks old, we went back over to the Caribbean, and that's where we lived. So we were there until my son was about 18 months old. And we weren't, at this stage, we were not planning on having any more kids for a while, because we had a lot going on. And there was a really massive hurricane in the Caribbean in 2017, last year, called Irma. You probably heard of it.
Yeah, of course.
It was like, it ripped through like a lot of the islands in the Caribbean. And my son and I left at the island 3 days before the hurricane hit our island. And we flew to California. So that was at the end of August. And my husband was on the island for the hurricane, and my son and I were intending to, from California, continue on to Australia. So it wasn't until I arrived in Australia, and I had been in Australia for a few weeks with my son, that I realized that I was pregnant. So
wow.
I had seen my husband at the end of August. And he was in sort of post-apocalyptic, post-hurricane situation. He didn't have any internet or phone or electricity or anything like that. So it was really hard to get a hold of him to even talk about the pregnancy. I remember the very first time I got a hold of him and managed to like tell him that I was pregnant through the phone cutting in and out. He was just like, how? He was like, how is, like, I'm not even there. Like it was like, I don't even remember like us having sex the last month that I was there. It was so stressful, and we were leaving. So we were both like, we were just like, what?
Right. When did it even happen?
Exactly. So I didn't see my husband for the first 4 weeks of the pregnancy, the first 4 months of the pregnancy.
Wow.
So he stayed in the Caribbean. And I was just hanging out in Australia with my son. And, I knew that I would free birth. I also knew that at that point, the midwife that I had with my son had since deregistered, and was now not currently working as a licensed midwife. And I knew that I wasn't going to seek out any other birth workers or birth keepers or traditional midwives. They're few and far between. I wouldn't have been able to find one.
Right.
And I was just like, well, I'm just going to do this on my own. And So yeah, I had a fairly unassisted pregnancy, although I had a UTI in sort of early pregnancy, and I went in to see a doctor about the UTI, and it hadn't even clicked in my head that they would sort of say anything about the pregnancy or like in try to manage my pregnancy. And I hadn't, again, I really didn't have a lot of experience with doctors. So I went in and to just say, oh, I have a UTI. I just need a little help with that. And, oh, by the way, I'm pregnant. And they were like, oh, you're pregnant. And then it was this big thing, or where are you going to birth, and all these questions. And I was like,
none of your fucking business, dude. How about that? Yeah. You don't just become public property because you are carrying the miracle of life. My God.
Exactly. Yeah, and I was really taken aback, and I wasn't I didn't go in there prepared for battle. I went in there just because I had a UTI and I wanted some help with that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I said, I had made the mistake of saying, oh, I'm just going to birth my baby at home, and then it was this, I had this really negative reaction from this young female doctor, and I basically just said, look, I came in here for help with the UTI, not for help with a pregnancy. Thank you very much. And it ended up being a fairly confrontational experience.
Damn.
And shocking to me, because the only experience I had with the doctor to do with pregnancy or birth or anything really at that point was that nice doctor that I had seen in my first pregnancy. So I was like, well, I'm not coming back here, that's for sure. And then I just sort of did most of my own prenatal care throughout that pregnancy. I had a lot of morning sickness. I didn't have any morning sickness with my son, and I had a lot of morning sickness in the second pregnancy. And I felt very, very sort of insular and very quiet. This pregnancy called for me to be just to rest a lot and to be at home a lot and to just kind of just sort of snuggle up and be quiet and not socialize or anything like that. So that was sort of nice in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And then my husband did arrive eventually when I was about 5 months pregnant. And then that was sort of our first opportunity to talk about the fact that I was pregnant and the fact that we were having another kid. So that was pretty scary. And it was a really stressful time for my husband and I because, he had never lived in Australia before, and we had just moved here. We had no money. We had no house. We had no jobs. I was already 5 months pregnant with our second kid. It was
That's
super
nuts.
stressful. Yeah, it was wild. And that, I felt like, I felt like the only person that was really, which was, a good thing in the end. I felt the only person taking responsibility for everything that was happening was myself.
Mm-hmm.
But that felt good. That felt good too. And I did get a referral for an ultrasound, and I did have an ultrasound this pregnancy with my daughter. And again, it's something that I regret doing. No, I absolutely regret both. Now that I've I'm much more educated about ultrasound now. I wish I had listened to Yolanda's podcast about ultrasound before I decided to have the ultrasound. No, it's messed up. I've tried to unpack why, and it wasn't I wasn't having my pregnancy managed by anyone. Mm-hmm. So it was literally me. I went to a doctor. I got a piece of paper for a referral for an ultrasound. I took myself to an ultrasound.
It runs deep.
Yeah. And I sat down on the ultrasound on the bed, thinking that it would be a 5-minute thing. And when the technician put the gel on my belly, she said, "Oh," and I was like, this is late. I was 28 weeks pregnant or something, maybe even 30 weeks pregnant at this point. Because I had wanted to do it when my husband was with me.
Mm-hmm.
So I had waited all this time. And she said, oh, just to let you know, like, this could take up to an hour. And my reaction was like, up to an hour? Like, I was like, that's crazy. And my husband had the same reaction. He was like, what? And the technician said, oh, yeah, it's because, you've left it too late in your pregnancy, and I have to get all these different measurements. And it immediately felt like a bad decision. And after about halfway through, she was like, oh, I probably need to get like all this. And then I needed to pee. And I was like, can I get up and go pee, please? And I went to go pee, and then I basically said, well, I think that's enough information. Surely, like, you have enough information.
And they're like, wait, no, actually, we don't have anything.
Yeah, exactly.
We have some basic measurements, and we can tell that there's a couple limbs.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, we saw the baby, like, it was done, and I felt bad. I walked out feeling really bad about the whole thing, and I was just like, oh, why did I do that? And then, like, for weeks, I mean, I still say it to my partner. I'm like, why the hell did I do that? Like, I don't understand why I did that.
But you do, like, you know why.
But I understand.
Yeah, like this is the measure of health, the false, measure of health of our generation. It's our grandmas weren't getting ultrasounds routinely. It's like it runs so deep. What does that say? That even you having this wild pregnancy and this free birth, there's still this thing in you that, and I'm not targeting you because it's everybody really, just that, totally. That says, like, I can't fully trust that I could be growing a baby without someone else who has more authority than me to take a peek and tell me that I'm okay.
Yeah.
And
totally.
It would make more sense if that were actually true.
Yeah.
Like, if ultrasound was a reliable technology, there would be more logic to, to our loyalty to it. But because we know that it's so notoriously unreliable in every way, shape, and form, and causes subjective harm, that together, and women still choose to get it for quote unquote peace of mind. It's fascinating.
It's crazy. And I knew that, like, I didn't care about having like I knew that ultrasounds were notorious for due dates, and I didn't care about having a proper due date anyway. I didn't want to know the gender. It's like there is literally no reason for doing it. I have no idea. I have no idea why. And I still think about it and try and unpack it, and I can't understand it. But so anyway.
Well, why do you think you did it? Did you just not give it any thought? Like, you were just like, I'm just supposed to get one? Or was it a relief to see that there was 4 limbs, or, to have, like you said it with your...
Maybe it just comes down to that, like, knowing that, because I knew I would have a free birth. Maybe there was something inside me that thought that if there was some kind of condition or something up with the baby that they would be able to tell me, then I could somehow prepare better for that, or I don't know. So maybe that was it.
Yeah.
But I mean, I now know that, they're incredibly inaccurate, so any information would have been useless, or probably just made the rest of the pregnancy more stressful.
Totally. Yeah. Okay.
So then I just, have the rest of the pregnancy unassisted. I was doing lots of prenatal yoga and keeping really healthy, and eating lots of really good food, and preparing. Like, I prepared a really lovely birth altar and space, and I did a lot of preparation. I was contacted by my yoga teacher, knew a woman who had just finished her doula training. And so I was contacted by a woman that was looking to sort of like do more births and have more experience at births. So I met her, and I agreed for her to be my doula, to come to my birth. And it's funny because then actually she received some I mean, she was just a doula. She had just come out of doula training, and she was told by a few people in the area, this is a really small town, that she shouldn't attend my birth, and that she shouldn't attend Freebirth, and that she was somehow legally like liable. Like she even came to me at one point. I mean, I met her when I was about 35 weeks pregnant, so it was very late in the pregnancy. But when I was about 37 or 38 weeks pregnant, she even asked me if I would sue her if something went wrong. And I was just like, you're going to be my doula. Like, there's not, am I going to sue you for like not having the heat pack warm enough, or like saying the wrong words?
But
like,
it's because women cannot be trusted to hold their own authority over their birth. And so if there is another woman there who's read a birth book, she instantly gets seen as having authority over you because you are a powerless woman. You know, I mean, it's so...
That's so messed up.
It's so gross. And it, you know, it's really so ultimately gross. What it's doing, and it's actually doing it quite successfully, except for the radical birth keepers out there. Shout out to you all. Keep doing what you're doing. But, you know, for the vast majority of women, you know, culture has effectively scared women from supporting women to birth on their own terms. You know, I mean,
absolutely.
It's so tragic.
Yeah. And I also got like a weird phone call from the hospital, from the medical clinic that I had gone when I had that UTI. They had somehow like taken it upon themselves to manage my pregnancy, or they had obviously put a note that I was pregnant. And I got a phone call towards the end of my pregnancy from a midwife connected to that clinic. And she just sort of said, hey, how are you? Blah, blah, blah. And she explained who she was. And she asked me how I was going with my pregnancy, or who I was seeing for the pregnancy. And we ended up having like a very strange conversation, and she was trying to get information out of me about where I was going to birth my baby and if I was going to hire a midwife. And
well, look, take it from me. Nobody likes to get into more people's business than a woman daring to dissent and daring to take authority over her own experience. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, that's insane. So that was a really weird conversation. And and then that was pretty much the end of it. And then I was 38, I was 39 weeks. I was almost 40 weeks when I went into labor, and I was at home I went into labor on the Friday. So it was a Friday evening. I had gone to sleep, and it was about 2 a.m. in the morning, and I had some very early labor. I had a very mild contraction, sort of like one every 30 minutes, from 2 a.m. to about 5 a.m. During the evening. And I would fall asleep during the contraction, and in between the contraction, and then the contraction would wake me up. But then they stopped, and I went back to sleep. And then Saturday morning, I got up, and I mentioned, I think, to my husband that I had a couple of contractions during the evening, but they had stopped. But there was something told me that I needed to buy more nettle tea. So I was like, I need more nettle tea. I was like, I don't have enough nettle tea, and I think I'm going to have this baby in the next few days. So I got my son in the car, and I drove into town to buy some more tea. And I had a couple of contractions while I was in town. But they were just super, super mild. They were like, I was aware that they were contractions, but they were very mild and very manageable. And I went home, and they started back up again at about 3 p.m. that on the Saturday afternoon. And again, they're about one every 30 minutes. And they were super mild. Like, I could talk through them. I could do whatever I was doing through them. They were very, very, very mild. But I was really excited to feel what early labor feels like, because I hadn't had that with my son. And I was like, this is so cool. Like, you get to prepare shit. Like, I went into the room and set up my candles, and made sure I had the Fitball and the yoga mat, and pulled the curtains down, and it felt so amazing to have that sort of mental space to prepare that in the next coming days this baby will come. So I really feel like I didn't have that with my son. And so, yeah, my husband went to work, and my dad, we were still living at my dad's place at this point. So my dad had gone to a meeting, and yeah, it was just me and my son. So it was me and my 2-year-old son at the house, and it was fun. Like, it was really fun being in early labor with my son. Like, we had a bath, and like, then my son loves dancing. So I had made 4 different birth playlists, and one of them was for like dancing the baby out. So I put on this dance playlist, and me and my son were dancing like naked, like in the bedroom, and like dancing the baby out. And my son was super prepared for the baby coming. We had read all these books and talked about it, and every time I had a contraction, he would like come up behind me and look into my butt and see if the baby was coming.
That's cute.
And he would say, "Baby coming?" And I would say, "No, not yet." And he was just like the coolest little birth attendant. Aww. And he was just super sweet. And yeah, and then so that was about, it was about 5 p.m. at this point, and the contractions were still like very, very mild. Just like, yeah, again, I could talk through them. I could be in any position. They were very, very mild. I think at about 5:30, I prepared dinner for my son. So we cooked some food together. And then at 5:30, my dad walked through the door, and he had come back from his meeting. And I said to my dad, I'd really love for you to hang out with my son now, and I can go into the bedroom by myself and just labor and be by myself. I didn't need to. Like, it wasn't at the point where I had to really go in, but I really wanted to. Like, I really wanted to enjoy this labor and put on my music and put on my candles and just go and be by myself. I really desired to do that. And so he said, "Sure, no worries." So he took my son into his room on the other side of the house, and they were in there, and I was just laboring by myself. At this point, I had texted my mum and my doula that I was in labor, and my mum lives an hour away, so she had started to head over, but I hadn't texted my doula to come yet. And then, so I had about an hour to myself from about 5:30 in the bedroom. My daughter was born at 7:10. So from about 5:30 to 6:30, I think I was alone in the bedroom. And it was just the most beautiful time. Like, it was just really peaceful and enjoyable, and I just loved it so much. And again, the contractions were super manageable, and I was doing lots of yoga. I was doing cat-cow and downward dog, and just listening to this amazing playlist that I had made, and dreaming about my baby, and speaking out my affirmations. And I was just super excited. And at this point, I thought probably the baby would be born, maybe about 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock. Or my husband usually gets home from work at about 10 p.m. So I thought, I'd probably be around then. And if it's earlier, I'll just call him home. And I think at about, must have been about 6:30 that my mum turned up. And she came into the room, and she was just kind of hanging out. And because of how I was sort of behaving, she felt like, I must still be in really early labor. And so she was really relaxed. And I asked her to get me some snacks and some more coconut water. And my son helped her cut up the watermelon, and he bought me snacks and he came into the room, and he was really calm. He was really cool. He he asked me about the baby coming, and I said that the baby's coming really soon and that I needed snacks and water. And he was like, okay, I'm going to get you the water. And he was on it. And I had a few, I think the first sort of contractions that I had to really moan and roar through were probably at around like 20 to 7, maybe, or quarter to 7.
Wow.
And so, yeah, that was really the first. At that point, like still at 20 to 7, I thought that I had hours and hours to go. Because it was just very, very mild and very relaxed and really enjoyable. And I was just having lots of fun, and it was great. And then all of a sudden at about quarter to 7, I just had this knowledge come to me that the baby was coming now. Like the baby was coming right now. And it was amazing. I was like, whoa, that's okay. Like, let's get ready. And I said to my mom to call my partner and to call my doula. But they both didn't make it in time. So she left the room to call them, and I was alone in the bedroom. And yeah, I just had a few, like maybe about 5 or 6 really like intense, like wild, like roaring like a lioness contractions, and they were amazing. Like they felt so good. And that was the really amazing thing for me when I birthed my daughter. Every single contraction, even from the beginning, even the early labor ones, they felt so efficient. Like every single contraction, I could feel her. It felt like she was descending an inch every single contraction. Like it just, I mean, obviously it wasn't that much, but it felt like she just was like, she was like on it. She was like, yes. Like,
and all that grinding work with your son, did in a way literally pave the way.
Definitely. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. But it just was such a phenomenal feeling.
How confident building.
Totally. Yeah. Like I was like, this baby is on it. Like she is like, and I didn't know the sex at that point, but I was like, she's really on top of it. She's doing a really good job. And so, yeah, I still had my pants on at this point, and I started to freak out about my pants. So I was yelling at my mom. My mom wasn't in the room, and I was yelling, Mom, you got to get my pants off, because I couldn't quite get them off myself. I was on all fours with my elbows leaning on the bed. So my mom was behind me trying to take my pants off. And I was like, this baby's coming now. And I just had a few roaring contractions, and I could feel her head really coming down, really crowning. And I had like quite recently listened to your birth story on the podcast, and I had this moment of fear come into me, thinking, how could I possibly be 10 centimeters dilated at this point? How could I possibly be fully dilated when I haven't even had, painful contractions at all? And so I reached inside and felt her head right there. And she was still in her little sack, and it was the most phenomenal thing. And her head felt so tiny. It was like touching like a little tennis ball, like a little slippery tennis ball. And I said to my mom, it was just my mom and me in the room at that point. And I just whispered to my mom, I said, she's like, the baby's coming. The baby's right there. She's coming. And, and I just had one more contraction, and her little head popped out. And my mom was kneeling behind me so she could see her little scrunched up face. And my mom said to me, should I call Dad and Ollie? My son's called Ollie. And I said, yeah, call them in. And so they came running from the other side of the house. And just as my dad and my son entered the room, her whole little body just slipped out. And so they saw her little body come out, and then I caught her and pulled her up to my chest, and everyone was just really silent and just in like disbelief, pretty much. I was just like, wow, it just popped out so quick. And I had only really had about like contractions that I really had to roar through. It was only about 5, and they were pretty intense, but I wouldn't describe them as painful at all. And that was only from about 6:45, and she was born at 7:10. So it was really, really, really fast.
And how did you feel after it?
I felt amazing. Yeah, I felt phenomenal. Like, it felt, it was just really peaceful and really happy and really powerful. Yeah, it just felt great. It just felt as it should be.
Yeah.
And it also felt really simple, just really simple and really easy, and really peaceful. And everyone just sat down, and my son, like, this was the moment that was really special for me. My son came up, and he wanted to be really close to the baby, and he just, like, he touched her little tiny top of her head, and and I, obviously I looked down and I saw that she was a girl, and that was a pretty phenomenal moment. I had really wished for a girl, and I was really hoping for a girl, so that was really, really sweet. But yeah, having my son just, like, touch her so gently, and he touched her little tiny ear, and he said, "Oh, her ears are so little." It was just such a sweet little moment. And I was able to say to him, "Yeah, you look, the baby's here, and you have a little sister." And he was just over the moon, and he was just so, so happy and so gentle with her, and he really understood the whole process, and that for me was really important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And then my partner walked through the door about 2 minutes later and saw that we had a daughter. And then my doula turned up about 5 minutes after that. And so they both missed the birth, but they were there for, I delivered the placenta and had a shower and got into bed. And we had my son cut the cord, because that was a tradition. My older brother cut my umbilical cord when I was born at home with my parents. So it was something that I really wanted to do. So we waited about 3 hours or 4 hours, but it was getting close to midnight, and my son really needed to go to bed. So we decided, okay, well, it's time to cut the cord. And we, I held our little daughter, and I said, I asked for her permission for us to cut the cord, and we thanked the placenta for everything that it had done, and I said to her that I'm going to be the one to nourish her from now. And we just used some dental floss, and my son cut the cord with the help of my partner, obviously, with scissors. And then everybody went to bed, and we snuggled up, and I snuggled up with my daughter. And that's the other thing, is that I was just, like, high. Like, I couldn't sleep for the first, that whole night I didn't sleep at all. I just stared at my daughter for 8 hours, just literally stared at her face. I was like, I honestly felt like I was on LSD. It felt very similar to being on acid. Mm-hmm. And I didn't have that experience with my son. And it went on for about 4 days. There
was a lot of drama around that first birth that you didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. You got, like, the pure uninterrupted oxytocin magic with that second birth.
Totally. And it was wild. Like, I just, every color, like, especially being outside, like, in nature, like, all the colors were so vibrant, and, like, my senses were so heightened. Like, my sense of smell and my hearing and everything, it was like, just, it felt so wild and vibrant and amazing. And she didn't latch on when she was born. My son latched straight away. And when she was born, she didn't latch, and she didn't seem very interested in latching. She was just tired, and so I let her, she obviously slept, and so she didn't latch until, almost 10 hours after her birth, when she woke up on the Sunday morning. So that was something that I was thinking about, during that time as well, because I had only had the experience with my son, and I thought, gosh, is she going to latch when she wakes up? I hope she latches when she wakes up. And yeah, of course she did. She woke up on the Sunday and she was just like ravenous, and she latched perfectly, and she was like, yes, like give it all to me.
I love that.
And yeah. So,
it's like, because we have all these rules, like a baby has to nurse before, the first 12 hours of life. And you have to wake a baby up every 2 hours and da-da-da-da-da. And then I interview free birthing moms, and they always have something that goes against all of that still is beautiful and, intuitive and just goes against all these rules.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, she was fine. Like she was having a really nice, good, solid nap. And yeah, she slept for 8 hours straight and didn't make a peep, and then woke up and was like, yes, give me as much food as possible right now, please.
I love it.
Yeah.
That's awesome. It's a crazy story, man.
The only thing that I had after her birth as well was and this is something that I think a lot of women don't speak about or it's not mentioned very much, is that I had really, really intense after pains after her birth that were 1,000 times more painful than the labor itself. So that morning, on the Sunday morning when she started to latch on, I had really wild, like very painful after pains, and I had them for 72 hours.
Did anything help?
Nothing helped. I tried motherwort, tincture. I tried a few things. Nothing really helped, and they were like constant when she would nurse, when she would latch on. But when she wasn't breastfeeding, it was also like almost consistently every 20 minutes for the next 72 hours. I had wild, like incredibly painful after pains. And they were so painful that I was crying, I was moaning, I was smashing my fist against the wooden bed to try and distract myself from the pain. And
it's so unfair.
It's so unfair.
So unfair.
I was like, what? I was like, I just had this like badass, like wild free birth. It was painless, literally painless. It was just the easiest, most simple thing. And then, it's like you can't get away without something.
Well, I love your story. It's awesome. It's just so badass. And, that's why I love these stories, because they're just ultimately quite simple and it's so powerful. And I could totally picture her just popping out with your man coming in after.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yep.
Well, I'm really proud of you, and I appreciate you sharing your story today.
Thanks so much. Thanks for allowing me to share.
That's it for today, everyone. Join us next week for another episode of the Free Birth Podcast. Thanks for joining us, and remember, your body, your choice. Lots of love.